Welcome to Rite Gud, the podcast that helps you write good. In this podcast, we tend to focus on the craft of writing, handling character, setting, theme, and so on. But there's another side to writing, the business side. We acknowledge it but don't talk about it a lot on this podcast, mostly because, to be perfectly honest, I'm not very good at it. I make very little money doing this. I have a day job for a reason. I am terrible at the self-promotion writing hustle, and I think it would be a little irresponsible and dishonest of me to offer advice in something that I'm genuinely bad at. But the grindset is real and inescapable if you ever plan to write for money, and it's foolish to ignore it. So here to talk about it in this episode is horror author Kyle Winkler. Thanks for coming on, Kyle.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So why don't we talk a little bit about what we mean by the hustle or the grindset when it comes to writing, and talk a little bit about the state of things for a writer or an artist. The state of things financially for a contemporary writer is not great.
No, it's not great.
It's never been great, but it's
never been great.
Not great.
It's never been. I've been thinking about a lot of these questions prior to coming on to the show, and one of the things I was thinking about was the hustle's always been with us to some degree, right?
Right.
So, without being too historical about it, you had to find a patron, hundreds of years ago. If you couldn't find a patron, you were fucked, right? Or you could keep writing, but what was the point if you weren't going to get a little, if you weren't going to get some shekels tossed your way? And then I'm jumping over a lot of history to the pulps. God, talk about hustle. I've been reading a lot of Clark Ashton Smith lately. He was one of the big three weird tales writers. Robert E. Howard and Lovecraft were the other two. And of course, all of these guys were writing their asses off to try to get money. Specifically Smith, because he was taking care of two older dying parents. And he really only wrote very heavily for about a 5-year period, right after the Depression until the mid-30s. For how many cents a word? 1.5 cents a word, maybe. So I see that as hustle too. And there's a negative and a positive to that too, right? And I'm sure we'll get into that. But no, it's never been good. I'm trying to think that who are the people who get paid for writing? Whoever writes the shitty commercials that we see on TV, puns. Whoever came up with the pun for the soda that you see between episodes of Cops or Law and Order or whatever, that person might make a little money, but maybe not even them. I don't know. I've never written for marketing. But the state of things for the writer or the artist is grim, unless you're one of 5 people. I should say, right. Probably people might be like, who is this guy? Why is he here? What's he have to say about this? And one of the things that I was thinking about is how do I answer that question? Is outside of, I teach writing for a living. I'm an English professor, right? But that's a very different type of thing from what a lot of people who are listening to this podcast do, right? So, and to some degree, I kind of have to put that aside because that doesn't really count. That's how I actually make a living, as I teach research writing, and I don't know, whatever, the assignments that I teach that students don't like, all the typical stuff, right? But outside of that, it's I remember thinking, how am I going to make money? How am I going to do stuff? How am I going to be able to pay for something that we want to do if I don't have enough money? We're a one-income family. One of the things I'm maybe jumping around a little bit is you had mentioned that people don't want to talk about this. They don't want to talk about money with regard to writing, right? And why might that be? Why is it that most people don't want to talk about it? What's the unwillingness to want to admit to that or talk about that?
I'm not sure what it is about it, but for just to give a little note about some of the financial realities of it, pay rates for short fiction, if adjusted for inflation, are a lot lower than they were back in the old pulp days. In the early days of amazing stories and Weird Tales. Now, these were pulp magazines. These were kind of bottom-of-the-barrel ones that had trouble attracting good writers because they could only pay 1 penny a word. And this is the 1920s. I just looked it up, but paying 1 penny a word in 1926 is about paying 17 cents a word today.
Holy cats.
I've never gotten paid 17 cents a word for writing short fiction in sci-fi fantasy.
What is the highest pro market rate going right now? Like, is it around 12 cents?
Yes, usually around like 12 cents is one of the better ones.
But I don't even know who the FNSF does,
I think
9?
I think they do more than that. I think they were doing 10 cents.
Really?
Okay. I think they've increased it.
I always tell my students how much I make, like, in the first week. And then they all look at me like, why are you here? And I'm like, well, that's a good question. See, this is the whole thing, right?
Asimov's science fiction pays 8 to 10 cents per word for short stories of up to 7,500 words, and 8 cents for each word over 7,500. I believe by the SFWA, 8 cents is the current pro rate.
Yeah, like the minimum.
Yeah, before you're less than that, you're considered a semi-pro, which is if you're paying less than 8 cents a word. So again, like bottom of the barrel, cheap, shitty pulps in 1926 were paying the equivalent of 17 cents a word. And I'm also going to point out there were more of them. There were way more pulps, because that's another side. If you're writing short sci-fi fantasy, there's not a lot of publications where you can submit to compared to how many there were in like the 1930s and the 1940s. And also there was a really wide variety of different types of pulp fiction magazines too. You didn't just have sci-fi fantasy, you didn't just have horror or what was called Weird Tales back then. There were also a lot of like Western magazines, romance magazines, detectives, men's stories, were like men's adventure magazines and so on and so forth. So a lot of pulp writers could make a living banging out short stories, a few every month. You'd have to do a few every month and you'd have to bang them out real fast. You couldn't just like goof off, but you could make a living on it. And that's just not really realistic today. And I want to stress that I'm not like blaming publishers for this. Like I don't think that the magazine publishers are like rubbing their hands together going like, ha ha ha, I'm hoarding. No, it's never. I'm making so much money on this and I'm hoarding it all. Like I know that's not happening. I know, people don't.
It's never been that way, right? Like if you read the history of for example, Weird Tales, right? Like that publication started being priced way too high. Mm-hmm. Right, I think it's great. But its issue that sold the most was its first, and then just went down from there. It's constantly in trouble or in close to failing in going out of print. And this doesn't seem like it's not unusual. Mm-hmm. What we have now, which they didn't have then, were Kickstarters. Like that's kind of how I see a lot of things staying alive. Is saying, hey, this is the NPR model, right? Like you like what we do. Yeah. Kick us a couple of bucks and we'll make sure that we keep doing the stuff that you like, keep the lights on and pay the people in, peanuts and scraps so they can keep cranking out the mimeograph machine. Right. So, but it's, we can't blame them. So it's like, but the thing is like they keep popping up. And I like that sort of like, it's that Jeff Goldblum, Ian Malcolm, life finds a way thing from Jurassic Park, right? These magazines, these journals, these publications, they want to keep going. And I'm thinking here of, yes, quote unquote, literary fiction, but also genre mags, right? Like Weird Tales won't die. Every time it kind of disappears, it keeps coming back. Or, Amazing Stories, wasn't it? Didn't it just came back after being gone for a while?
I think so.
Somebody started republishing it
for a little while.
Yeah, and it's that's great that people want to do that, and I constantly find more and new publications online through Twitter bios or Blue Sky bios, or just kind of like from hearing stuff from other people, like this I submitted here. I'm like, I've never heard of that before, but they pay like 1 cent a word. Yeah, it's like wow, it's amazing. I mean, like even 1 cent is like great because. Prior to learning about pro markets, 12 years ago, I was sending everything to literary magazines because that's what you were sort of taught to do. I was a creative writing major and then got into an MFA program, and how they sort of, what they tell you, is like, okay, well, when you write your stories, you send them off to here, here, and here.
Yeah.
And those pay you in contributors' copies.
Yeah, it's really typical.
Or pats on the head.
Very typical for literary magazines not to pay anything.
To not do anything.
And even on top of it, a lot of literary magazines charge submission fees, which is like, what? That's crazy to me.
Many years ago, which doesn't seem like many years ago to probably anybody who's listening, but back in like in the early 2000s, that was sort of unheard of, so far as I can tell. Like, I had never paid anything to submit anything anywhere. And so it's so odd to me now, or to see on the way out the door, they'll say things like, if you want a really extensive personal annotation of your story, an editorial critique of your story, you could pay $55 or something. I'm making that number up, I don't know. But it's enough for me to, like, no, I would have never wanted to do it anyway. But anybody who is a beginning writer who might be lured into that, right? I put this under the negative part of the hustle. I think that shit is pernicious.
Yeah.
I think telling people, like, hey, you can sub and we'll reject you, but we'll still actually get 7 times more the money that you would have to pay just to submit, or maybe even the amount of money we would have paid you if your story was accepted. Because I can only think of, like, on maybe one hand the amount of places that actually pay quite a bit of money for a literary story. Maybe 2 hands at this point, but they're not a lot. And they don't have an SFWA. They don't have a minimum. No. Any other, you could open up, Benedict Weekly and be like, this week I'm paying you $5, and then next week you pay me
$10 to submit. I pay contributors $5.
Right. So it's kind of all over the place. It's the state of things is always grim, and I wish it wasn't.
Yeah.
But that's
I don't feel good about places that charge submission fees. I refuse to send anything to those, but in terms of, like, paying poorly or not paying much, I really want to stress again that I'm not, like, blaming editors for this. I understand that you're not making money off of this either. People don't pay for fiction magazines the way they used to, where short fiction is competing with a lot of forms of entertainment that didn't exist back then. They didn't have video games and cell phones and, everything that we have now. So if you're trying to write a short fiction magazine, you are competing with this gigantic glut of free content and very, very, very accessible, like, very carefully designed to distract you, like a Skinner box forms of entertainment that's portable and easy. So, of course, it's just not going to make as much money because there's more competition, and the competition's very attractive. It is very easy and brain-melting to play Candy Crush Saga compared to, like, attempting to read a story or something. So,
the most dangerous thing in the last 2 years of my life has got to have been Reels being more popular. Like, it's so easy to lose an hour of your life to this, right? Instead of, like, reading. But, I mean, I'm sitting at a table that is, like, probably a lot of other people were listening to this, like, stacked with books. I mean, my basement has bookshelves, and then my bookshelves upstairs. Like, I read a lot, and I still am liable. I'm still, like, sucked into this. So, I understand that. I get why people wouldn't. And again, I teach young kids. I teach teenagers and people in their early 20s. And so, and I have to have them read things. I want them to read things in my class, right? So when we want to read something, whether it's a poem or a short story or an essay or an excerpt of something, anything, many of them are just incredibly resistant to it because it's not something that they're used to doing. I often ask them, have you ever read a poem in high school? And many of them don't. I mean, I live in Northeast Ohio and I teach in this part of the state. So it's like, it's not in the middle of nowhere, and I think it can be used as an example for a lot of places all over the country. Right. And also they're not writing a lot either. Many students only write maybe 3 pages or maybe a little bit more in high school. I remember at least writing a paper that had to be 15 pages. Yeah. And I went to high school in the 90s though, so that was many, many years ago. But the point here is like, these are the people who you would normally want to get to read the types of things that we're doing, right? Writing these stories, you want them to read them. And instead, of course, they're going to want to play, like they want to be on a Switch, they want to be on an Xbox, they want to be doing something that's more interactive with them. But one of the questions I had for us, I guess, was something like, why is it that there is this hustle in writing when it seems like so many people don't care about the writing or the reading? Where is this desire for those who are trapped in it or want to put out this hustle, right? Like, where is that? Where's the lure for wanting to be a writer? Because it's never made people money. If they've been paying attention, like the odds on you becoming a Stephen King or a J.K. Rowling or a Danielle Steele or whatever are so astronomical. It's like, forget about it. So is this just like, are we idiots? Or what is it that's, why is this still going on?
Yeah. I kind of wonder if, even though rationally we all know the chances of even being able to quit your day job and write full time that's a very low chance. I'm wondering if in the internet age, instead of competing for that, we're competing almost for like clout. Because people will do incredibly stupid things just for internet attention, just for likes and subscribes, even if they're not monetizing it, and it almost feels like a little bit like that. Like, oh, I won this award. I won a Hugo. What can you do with it? Like, I don't know. There it is, though. I got it.
What can you do with it? You can put it on the cover of your book that comes out.
Yeah, you can put
that will sell 300 copies. Clout. I think there's a lot of investment in the colophon. Is what I used to say. And for people who don't know what that is, it's that page in the book that tells you where everything came from, the date and all that stuff, right? And this is a work of fiction. But it also can be used to describe the little icon on the spine sometimes. Like the little Borzoi dog or the Tor mountain or, the whatever your little thing is that you want, that you grew up looking at. You're like, oh, I want that, right? And if you don't have that, you're not quote-unquote real. You haven't, quote, made it. And that's what I did for a long time, And then you feel like, then you do the math, right? I just saw this online today, actually. They were like 2%, sometimes even less, of the people who submit to these prorate markets are getting published. That's just the people who are getting published, right? And you have to imagine that, like, how many other people are writing, to try to get their words into this thing. So there's got to be something about it. They want to be. You want Neil Clark to like you. You want, Wendy Wagner to like you. You want, when CeCe Finley Charlie was the editor of FNSF, I wanted him to like me.
Yeah.
I didn't even care. He could have been like, I like the story, I'm keeping it for myself, and I'm paying you, but I'm not publishing it. I'd have been like, yes, validation. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just validation. We're all just desperately wanting some mommy or daddy to tell us that we're good and pat us on the head.
And there is still a little bit of money to be made out of it, but better to be thought of as like a hobby that sometimes pays you, and not necessarily a sensible career path. And I don't want to say that it's impossible to make a living off of writing. I mean, it's not impossible. It's just
I think it's accidental
very hard.
now. I think it's accidental now. I think the people who make a living off of it do it accidentally, right? Like Andy Weir posts The Martian online for yucks while he's working he's like a software developer or something, right? And then when it takes off and it gets published and makes a bunch of money, he still doesn't quit his job, though. Like, he didn't quit his job for a while, which is a smart move.
Yeah.
Right? Until he knew, I think, like, he's not stupid, right? Like, okay, well, he did the math. He's like, okay, now I can quit my job. Okay. But, like, that doesn't, I don't think that happens. I used to joke around with my students and say that the last person this is not true, but the last person who could make a living off of their writing was F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? When he would sell a story to the Saturday Evening Post and make, like $1,500, which was just a fucking bananas amount of money back then. And, then he can, like, fuck off to Paris with Zelda and get ripped on, martinis on the bank or whatever. And that just doesn't, it doesn't exist anymore. Again, I know we keep saying this, but, like, the making a living part of writing is just so incredibly tough that the hustle of that is, say, having a full-time job and having to carve the time out for writing, right? You have a full-time job. I have a full-time job, right? Most of the people I know who write have full-time jobs. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. The only people I know who still write and are published authors that don't have a full-time job are now retired, just because they've retired from that job. So that's why. That's why they have.
Or I know of a couple others, but they're all supported financially by
a spouse,
right, or their parents, or something else like that.
There's some other element there that's keeping these people afloat, and that great. Oh my god, are you kidding me? Like, if I happen to
that sounds pretty sick.
Fell backwards into like
if I could
pool of money,
marry some rich person who lets me write all day, that'd be cool. And then perhaps murder him like in an episode of Columbo. And, like, wear a very beautiful gold caftan while telling a small, swarthy, rumpled Italian man, I couldn't dream of anyone who'd want to hurt my darling husband, Lieutenant.
The Daphne du Maurier novel, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So let's move into this. It's one of the ways that people who have a full-time job who write teach writing. And that is teach creative writing, right? So they'll teach in a workshop, or they will teach a class, and I said this when we were talking. I was like, I'm going to be teaching a class like in 2 days about horror. So like, I don't want to seem like I am and that I'm not attached to this, right? But it's like if I get approached and I like what it is and it's something I feel like I can contribute, and I'll do it, right? But there are so many of these things. I don't know. I can't really.
There's a lot of little workshops. A lot of little writing workshops. There's so many, and it kind of feels like the way to make it as financially as a writer, it's not to sell your writing, but it's to sell yourself as a writing influencer and charge for workshops. Yeah. And I don't want to diss anyone who goes to workshops or who gives workshops. They can be very, very helpful. Yeah. And I've gone to them too, and they can be great, and respect people who are good at it. But there is very much this, okay, I've gotten published, let me charge people to go to
for the secrets.
For the secrets, let me teach you how. And some of them are pretty good, but some of them look like a real grift. I remember seeing one writing workshop, quote unquote, which taught about hope punk, sweet weird, and squeakcore. And they were charging a good bit of money for it, and I'm like, motherfucker, we gave that episode out for free. You
should get some kickback on that.
I should charge. We're $1 a month. I can't remember what they were charging, but it was like a good chunk of change for an online workshop. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'm so mad.
When I think about these, it's like most of these things are people who can't afford or don't have the time or don't know the mechanics of or live too far away from a program that is what tends to be the standard is an MFA program, right? Like going to an MFA program that allows you to work with somebody for 2 or 3 years and to produce a thesis that you then might be able to turn into a book with connections from those people if they have connections in the industry. That's usually how that works, right? But then there's also like independent ones that are put on by, and these can be of varying quality, like I always see a group like at the local library. It's like, hey, local writers group. And it's like, I should just go just to see what that's like. I don't even know what that's like. They just could be a bunch of little old ladies working on memoirs, or could be dads writing, like their action adventure novel, or people really trying to really crank out like a legit thriller or something. Who knows? But every time one of these workshop things comes up, and I had to ask myself, like when I got offered to do this is from Blick Cleveland, which is a reputable group of people. I was like, do I want to do this? Do I have anything to say? Do I have to think of a topic that I wanted to teach?
Right.
And because it's like, if I'm going to do a class or a workshop, the people have to leave with something, feel like they got something, right? I don't know. It could be in any various, like they feel better about analyzing fiction that's their own or others, or they feel better about writing something that's in their own genre or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like But I would hate to have to charge somebody, have them come in and leave. And I'm talking about a one-time thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then go, I felt like I wasted my money. That would be horrible.
Yeah.
You know? So, and that's different when you, those are different though when they're connected to colleges, right? So like MFAs, right? Like there was the question, is it worth it to go to them? Because there's always this, what was that book a couple years ago, MFA versus NYC? Like, should I get an MFA or should I just move to, you know, like, and I got an MFA many years ago. And here's my advice to people listening, by the way. If you're going to get an MFA, go for it, but don't pay for it, right?
Ooh, smart.
But, and I say that as somebody who actually teaches for an MFA that you have to pay for to get. So trust me, I'm being very, I know which side of the bread is buttered. What's the phrase that I'm looking for there? I know which side my bread is buttered on. There we go.
Right.
And when I applied, I got offers to, you know, they'd make you teach adjunct, right, and give you a stipend, often, which is quite low. But that's how you do it. You say yes, you accept, you teach 1 or 2 courses, you do your classes, you write your thing, and then that's it. And if you leave, then you've got a little bit of experience to go and be an adjunct. Or whatever. You know, you do whatever you want to do. But when you pay to go get one, and I guess I should say this defending my own job now, is that if people want to pay for an MFA, I have a couple of things to say. Make sure that you are paying with money that you don't have to pay back. Like your parents have decided you want to do this, or, you know, you saved up the money to go do it. Fine. I'm not going to tell people how to spend their money in that regard. Or, you know, you want a grant, you know, or, you know, there's all ways I've seen people pay for these things. But, you know, going into debt, taking out a mortgage to get better at writing is not worth it.
No,
it's not worth it.
No.
So please don't do that. But I have to say, from my experience, every time I look back on my MFA, I mean, I'm glad I got it. I met a lot of great people. I met great writers. I did learn stuff. I learned a lot, you know. So I guess it just depends. But I've also met people who were both in my program with me and at other places who were like, no, I wasted 2 years of my life. You know, I should not have done that. Or it was a clique, you know, which you hear a lot about. Or they didn't want what I was writing. That often happens, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to write X thing, and they said, no, I can't do that. And so then got booted or got exiled or got ostracized or wasn't taken seriously or something like that.
Right.
So I think being around other people who want to do what you want to do, whether or not it's for a paycheck or not, is the key there. Is that being around other people who write and take it as seriously as you, no matter what setting that is what people are desperate for, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and just being around other writers, successful or aspiring, is really energizing and really motivating and great, because writing is such a lonely profession or lonely occupation. You sit alone by yourself, and it's kind of hard to meet with other people who are doing this, and when you click with the right group of people, it can feel really, really good, and just it's hard to find that outside of like a workshop or an MFA program or something.
Are you never surprised? I'm always surprised when a new class of Clarion graduates comes out and they go on to some success, right? Which I actually think their percentage of success is much higher than an MFA program, getting into the places they want to get into. And I'm thinking like, okay, what is it that the people who teach at these Clarion classes, which their faculty fluctuate every year, what Eleusinian mysteries are they feeding these people? Like, what are the tablets? Where are these coming from? Where are they keeping them? Right? Because I'm sort of like, I'm being serious though. It's like, what is it that they're giving them? Are they just giving them like basic writing instruction? Because it's like, I feel like
I think a lot of it is, at least for the Clarion, it's making it very marketable to that particular segment of the market. And I'm going to be a little more cynical and suggest that there might be a little bit of favoritism and nepotism at play. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I don't think you have to hide that. There has to be. I know
there's a good bit of it in
everywhere.
there.
That's everywhere.
They get matching tattoos. Like one of the Clarion graduating classes, I think in 2016, they got matching tattoos. That's a little culty. You can't tell me like, oh, it's not a clique. Like, you got matching tattoos of the alchemical symbol of arsenic on your wrists, and photographed this, and the official Clarion whatever put it in their newsletter saying like, this is cool, this is a sign of how much we bond. Not, hey guys, that's kind of fucked up, don't do that. Like, I'm gonna say it right now, if any of you listening gets a Rite Gud tattoo, I will kick you in the teeth. Don't you fucking do that. Like, I'll be horrified. Please do not get our logo tattooed on your body. Never do this. It's upsetting to me. Do not do this.
Oh, but it's people's
like the Clarion
bodies.
West fucking people, like, said, like, yeah, we think it's really cool that you all got matching tattoos, like you're in that Novixium Albany sex cult, Nexium or whatever it's called. Yeah, we're putting that in our newsletter. That's awesome. Like, no, you can't tell us this isn't a click at the very least when you're branding yourselves.
So talking about hustle in a very practical way, if what they're telling them in these workshops is something, we could probably ask somebody. I'm sure one of us knows somebody who went. Like, what is it that they tell you? Like, oh, well, they tell you how to, like you said, tailor a story to be marketed and whatever. But part of me is like, I immediately resist that though, because the whole point of that is, if I write a story that is tailored to a certain editor or a certain market, right? I can already hear head shaking as I say this. If I write a story that's tailored to a market, am I writing that because I wanted to write it or because that's the story that they wanted? Now, I'm sure there's a middle ground there where it's like, I can still have my artistic virtue, right? And my own vision, whatever that might be, and still market something and make it more rhetorically applicable to a program.
I'd also note that, I can understand that there could be commercial rewards in tailoring, say, a full-length work, like a novel, to the market, because you make a bit more money. Not much, but you do make more money selling those. Short stories, even if you sell them, you're not making much off of them. You're making a couple $100, so it's very weird to try to tailor that to the market, to the pro mags, when you're still making basically some extra beer money at the end of all of it.
Well, and also think about the people who read these. The people who read these are actually people who have a really wide tolerance for strange things. They're already reading SF and fantasy, right? So let shit rip. Why are you trying to curtail? It seems so strange to me that a particular type of story will show up in a particular type of publication, and it's not, like I was saying earlier, it wasn't until, I'm going to gas you up again. I read one of your stories in Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction years ago. I was like, this is not like anything that I'd read in this magazine before, which is why I liked it so much, because it seemed different, right? And it's like, and if you do that, I think we'll have a better time as readers and writers. It's like the number of times that, not just myself, although I've had many personal experiences where I wrote a novel, gave it to the agent was like, okay, we'll try it, send it out, and people said, yeah, but we don't really know where to put it, right? It doesn't fit what we would, like, we don't have a good way to market it, we don't have a good way to make it, kibble or pablum to the least common denominator, right? So unfortunately, we're just going to have to pass on it. And you're like, well, I know what I wrote doesn't suck. The agent knew it didn't suck, and the editor knew it didn't suck. But there was some other bullshit reason that you're really worried about a lot of, people walking to a Books A Million or a Barnes & Noble and turning their nose up at something that sounds odd, when in reality, right, every time I see people say, this is the book that got rejected, people are like, fuck, man, send it to me. I want to read it. It's like, people are hungry for different new stuff, which is the way I think things had been, many, many decades ago. And it's sort of all getting flattened, if that makes any sense.
But I feel like we should define a little bit what we mean by the hustle, because there is a writing hustle, there is a writing grindset, there is this way of presenting yourself online, especially as a writer. And I think what I mean by the hustle is this weird position that writers are, and to a certain extent all artists and creatives are in this new age, is that you find yourself becoming an influencer first, and then the writing is secondary to it. Because unfortunately, it's not a meritocracy. You don't end up on panels based purely on the strength of your work. You don't end up being invited to guest lecture at a workshop based purely on how good your work is, and you certainly don't get awards based purely on merit, and maybe you don't totally get published purely based on merit either.
No, I don't think so. I
don't think that's the case. So instead, what a lot of this comes from is promoting your brand, promoting yourself, and basically being a sort of influencer first and a writer second, and so your fiction becomes secondary, almost like an afterthought, and it has to be part of this personal brand. And the way you tailor fiction, it's fiction that gets a lot of traffic and a lot of buzz. June Martin once referred to it as email forwardiness in the most like perfectly savage insult. It's very topical, it's very soundbite friendly, very discourse-y, very shareable on social media, which I'm wondering how that's going to change with the way social media is sort of becoming complete shit.
Shit show extreme, yeah.
But that's what I mean by a lot of the hustle. It's the hustle of being a writer, of
doing that stupid tweet that I did a couple days ago that's like, here's how many words I wrote. Like, I really try not to do stupid shit like that, but I only when I'm online, I'm talking to like 13 people, and I know exactly who they are. And I'm mostly doing it as a sort of like, it's a selfish thing, because it's like I need myself to know that I'm doing something, right? And I can tell my wife and I can tell my kids, and they'll go, okay, great, thanks. Or I still, my wife, I'm like, hey, I did this many words today. She's like, I have no idea what that is. Like, how many pages is this? And I'm like 3 pages. And she's like, that's great. Is that good? Is that a lot? And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So it's not. But people online are like, oh, wow, really, good for you, whatever. So you're sort of looking for this feedback. It's that professional socialization I was talking about, right? Where people are using online, which I think is the positive part of social media, is like create positive groups of people who want to help each other out. And there's also the negative side of that, which is like people who only are inspirational in their writing and never really, do you know what I mean? Like making other people... And they might say, oh, that's part of being in a literary community. And I'm like, yeah, but if it's more like a chicken soup for the writer's soul instead of, an actual, what are you giving people? Are you giving people actual instruction? Or you're just trying to make them feel good about the type of thing that you do? It's just like, I got successful doing this, and you can too. 3 easy payments at $9.99 or, like...
All right, so that brings us to... almost a parallel I've noticed. So in writing, we're establishing there are a lot of people with big dreams that aren't terribly realistic. A lot of people are willing to invest a lot of time and money in this with this vain hope that they're going to make it big. And a lot of writing workshops promise to tell you how to make you a great writer. And I think deep down what they're actually selling you is success. Like they're sort of implicitly, I think, promising you success in the industry, which is kind of iffy at best. And so you have all these people who are aspiring to do something, and the most money is through teaching others and not necessarily through selling the product itself. It kind of comes across almost as like this MLM, like a multi-level marketing scheme. For those of you who aren't familiar, a multi-level marketing scheme, it's basically a pyramid scheme where you sell a product. So an example is like LuLaRoe or Herbalife or Monat. If you're still on Facebook, you might have been contacted by a former high school classmate who promised you a great job and opportunity for independent women selling cosmetics and stuff like that. It's one of those. They're everywhere, and sort of desperate people kind of cling to them because it promises something awesome. It's like, yeah, if you invest a ton of time and just a little bit of money to buy your sample kit into this cool new independent business venture, maybe you'll maybe you'll get it big and make six figures and be able to quit your day job and what is it? Is it Mary Kay that gives you a pink convertible or something like that?
Well, now I think it's like a little SUV
or something like that. But it feels so much like an MLM in that we have all these people kind of hopeful.
It does.
Pouring money into trying to make it when the reality is that like most of you aren't going to make it. Most of you are going to maybe make some beer money if you make anything. And the actual money is in getting more suckers to sign up for your downline under you.
Right, but the only part where that metaphor breaks down is the fact that you don't pass any money up, right? And you're just making more people. It's even harder actually than an MLM if you wanted to put it that way. Because you have to find new people that want to come to the class because they don't stick around and pay you; they just go off. And the idea of it being like, hey, I don't really have anything to offer you except the structure of the class, right, is in the worst way. That's how that happens, where that turns into a bit of a suspicious, like, I'll sell you success, or I'll sell you glamour, or I'll sell you a mindset or a vibe, really is what they're looking for. And I think the problem is that the audience for intense reading has shrunk just amazingly in this country. I mean, in this country, in America. There are other countries that still have very high reading publics, but not really here. And then when I say reading, I don't mean like on your phone. You know, I'm talking about like subscribing to a literary magazine, or reading a pro mag, or a book, or even getting things from the library. You know, it's gone down considerably. So the audience has shrunk. However, the amount of people who are writing has gone up. So you have more product in the sense of like you have more art being written, you have more books, you have more poems, but you have less people wanting to read it. And now though, the audience has shifted to not readers but other people who want to write. So writers are turning to wannabe or would be or newer writers, apprentice writers, and saying, okay, you're not going to read the thing I wrote, but I'll teach you how to write your own thing, right? And this is how this is how I see it. That's what's happened. And so the audience has gone from being readers to wannabe writers, or to aspiring writers. And you just don't have.
It's not a healthy ecosystem, I don't think.
No, it's not. And that's what I'm saying is like, or what I'm trying to get to anyway, is like how. Let me give you an example. Okay, so very practically, some years ago, I had out of nowhere started playing Magic the Gathering. Don't even know how it happened. Right? And I had remembered it very briefly when it came out in '93, when I was like old enough to know what was going on. Didn't do anything with it. And then suddenly, and I'm 40 and I'm like learning how to play this card game. Okay. I was so obsessed with it in the beginning that I was like, well, I want to write about it because I've got all these thoughts, right? So I found a website. It was called Hipsters of the Coast, and they paid for my articles, right? It was a bunch of great people doing cool stuff, and I had this like theme that I wrote on, and I turned one in every month, and I got paid beer money, like you said. But it was, like I got 3 kids, it's nice to have a little bit of extra money in my pocket for stuff, and pay bills or food or whatever. And I was only there for a year before we were told, like, hey, we got to shut down. And they had been going on for a long time. They were actually one of the longer outlets that had articles about Magic the Gathering and other games. And it turned out that they were just like, we don't have enough readers. There's not enough ways to monetize. People don't want to read this anymore. They want to watch YouTube videos. So they want to watch other stuff. They want to listen to podcasts about it. They don't want to read the articles. And it stopped, right? So I don't have that money. But that was an example of a positive hustle. There was something I wanted to write about. I found a way to get paid for it. I did that for a little bit. But it's also an example of how the hustle, dries up because of the other problem that we're talking about, which is that people don't want to read anymore, or they're not wanting to read certain things. So
there's another side of it too, is that the hustle drives you insane. After a while, the hustle absolutely drives you fucking insane.
You'll burn out.
You burn out, you become a weird... I mean, becoming an influencer warps you into this inhuman personal brand. So does the writing hustle. It warps you. It also warps your writing into being a little bit more, like, viral and less passionate. And I mean, I'm talking about my own stuff going on there. I noticed that as I've gotten more, like, mentally healthy and just a lot happier in my life, we've lost subscribers in the podcast. I noticed that every time that someone gets very angry at me online and a bunch of people get furiously mad at me, we would get a big boost in subscribers, which to me that sounds like a kind of attention/financial incentive to make people mad. But that's not actually good.
That's how the news works.
That is how it works, and that's a lot how the attention economy works is controversy. But I actually don't enjoy being controversial. A lot of people have accused me in the past of being a shock jock and being deliberately provocative because I want people to be mad at me, and I actually don't enjoy it. It's not fun having, like, hundreds of people write to you and tell you should die and that you're a Nazi or something. Like, it feels pretty fucking bad, actually.
Well, usually people in your position, though, are not trying to be shocking or provocative for the sake of being provocative or shocking, like a Johnny Rotten or a Howard Stern or something like that. It's you're saying what your opinion is.
Yeah.
And the people and it happens to be in the majority consensus, the one that people are not wanting to say, or isn't held by a lot of people yet, or one that people haven't really thought through to yet, like they haven't thought far enough to get to where you were, or again, it's like the reaction that you've gotten from a lot of other people. This is slightly off topic. This sort of seems like outsized to me. Like, I just don't understand.
Yeah, it seems outsized to me. It seems pretty weird. It seems very, very weird, which is another thing I want to point out. Simon McNeil, friend of the podcast, wrote an article that appeared in Type Bar, and it was called No One Wants to Buy the Future, and it's about how sci-fi publishing in the United States is not in a great position, and a lot of sci-fi publishers got really personally offended by it. But what I'd say is that if sci-fi publishing in the USA was in a healthy position, the entire industry wouldn't flip out every 6 months over something that I say offhand on this podcast that has at most 400 regular listeners and less than 200 patrons. Like, we are small potatoes. If your industry was actually big and healthy and robust, you wouldn't know who the fuck I am.
Well,
at all. I am very small.
Many of us have forgotten how to just ignore things. Right? Like, like that's what happened. Like, I spent most of my middle school years being ignored, you're just being ignored. Learning how to just not respond to stuff. This seems to be like a very powerful tool that I think we've forgotten about. So if you don't like it, you can just not say anything. Because it's not as if, like, you have some sort of presidential platform that you're putting forward. So you didn't write Project 2025. You're not trying to, like, ruin or take over Europe or anything. That's not what's going on. It's like an opinion about a genre that many people don't read. So, But in any case, going back to what you were saying about the part where there's just such a small amount of people who are reading this. There's such a small amount of people who are wanting to, like, I keep thinking, like, who are the people who have subscriptions to a lot of these magazines that we are talking about, like, Lightspeed or Clark's World or, FNSF. I mean, I have subscribed a couple of times to these off and on, and I dip in. I do this all the time. I'll get a couple, stay for a little while, switch, maybe don't get anything, because I do want to support these places, but I also just sort of, like you said, you get tired, it's kind of the same thing over and over again. I don't know. It's like, what are you supposed to do? We need people to learn how to write grants in these genres, right?
I mean, I'm sure that Raytheon is writing up a grant for short science fiction fantasy right now and working on it, and our very wonderful, extremely publicly progressive, queer feminist sci-fi writers who are all currently on social media defending Neil Gaiman will be very, very happy to apply for that grant and to write very, very long posts about why we're bad for saying that it's kind of fucked up to do so.
Why is it always missile contractors who want to like underwrite, something? Why can't it be? I don't know. I just feel like we're not being adventurous enough. People in our field adventurous enough to go. And before people are like, well, what are you doing? I'm not doing anything. Like I don't have time for it. And I don't know how to do it. But I'm saying like I know there are people who can, and there's money out there to be had, to be able to fund it. And some people might go, well, I'd rather just kickstart it, which in and of itself is a hustle. These people who are having to run these magazines and raise the money to keep them afloat is like, I don't know how these people are getting any sleep at night. I don't think they are.
No.
So, but the negative hustle of let me sell you on what it is that I do so you can then do it is always going to be an allure. It's always going to be. And I don't think there's ever going to be a way that it's going to go away. Whereas, like, everybody says this, or I've heard versions of this, like, Melville didn't have an MFA, right? These people pre all these sort of whatever we're talking about, these like draws towards learning how to write, were done by people who just sat alone, mostly, and read, and were very, very idiosyncratic, and that's why we have these great works of art, and so to some degree, I'd want to tell people, like, and I say this as somebody who makes money off this, like, stop listening to other
Accept this podcast. You should definitely keep listening to this podcast and give us $1.
And, go...
Give us $1 a month.
Read weird fucking collections of books that nobody else are reading,
That's my hustle. I will say one controversial statement every month
for $1
about short science fiction fantasy in exchange for $1.
That's not a hustle.
That's not a very good hustle. I'm not good at this. I'm terrible at this.
No one could blame you for that. No one could blame you for the hustle part. So, I guess there's a couple things. Like, you had asked, like, how do you deal with it? Like, how are you supposed to? Do we just like accept it? Or
yeah. Well,
because there's no.
Did we want to talk about some notable literary hustlers?
Oh yeah,
as an example
these
of
are
crazy. I mean, sometimes I've just been wanting to talk about them for a long time as people who've kind of I don't know whether to hate them or respect them, because on the one hand they're complete scam artists, but on the other hand it feels like what they've done is only like a twinge scammier than what it takes to get commercial success in fiction publishing. Lainey Sarum, I might be mispronouncing this name, a YA author who managed, I believe this was in 2017, managed to cheat her way onto the New York Times bestseller list by arranging large buys from verified New York Times reporting bookstores. And she was really clever in that she would mass buy just under the amount that triggers the New York Times standard for red flagging mass book orders. Because they do this thing where a lot of times writers or companies will mass buy their own book to artificially put it on the bestseller list. Like
Donald Trump Jr.
Donald Trump, a lot of political propaganda books or politician books will like put out their memoir or their bullshit book and then have their teams buy like thousands and thousands of copies to say, look, it's a bestseller, and then they'll just throw the copies in the garbage or whatever.
But the Times will put, do you know what the symbol is they put next to it?
I think it's a little dagger.
It's a dagger.
Or something, right?
I love it.
It's a little dagger next to it to say, like, this is fake. This isn't a real bestseller. But she was able to get her book, believe it was called A Handbook for Mortals, just a really terrible
like that,
Mary Sue type book, by, first of all, figuring out what the bookstores that report to the New York Times were, because they don't look at every book that's sold out all over the country. They just sort of take a survey of what's selling at a certain number of bookstores. And she knew what these bookstores were, and also knew exactly the number of books you need to buy from them to trigger the flag or the dagger, and bought just underneath it. So despite having this book that was not actually accessible to buy on most formats, she managed to get up to a massive national New York Times bestseller list artificially without the dagger, at least in the first week, and it pissed off a lot of people. And I'm torn between like being mad at her or going like, honestly, I kind of respect that.
This reminds me of students that I had. It's like all this ingenuity into not doing the thing. It's like, go be an engineer or something. Like, go put that intelligence towards something that's... Like, why would you put it towards getting on the New York Times bestseller list? Like, she clearly has the chutzpah and the know-how to, like, you know... It's almost like a really low-stakes heist or something, you know? Like, it's a really bad Ocean's 11. Like, I'm going to get my book on the New York Times bestseller list.
I kind of respect her for just mass buying her own book instead of spending the money on going to workshop after workshop after workshop. Like, I wonder if financially it works out to being about the same amount.
Like, what did she... I read the wiki page. I didn't know... Maybe I skipped over if she made any money off of it. Like,
probably not.
It's sort of like the really quick, accelerated way of, like, instead, like, the self-published author goes and puts a bunch of copies of their book on the bookshelf at, like, Barnes & Noble or something, you know, in hopes that they don't get caught and thrown away. It's, you know, but then now what? But now everybody knows. Unless then people read it and it's really good and then, you know, people like it.
It is definitely not really good.
And there you go.
It is not a good book.
So what did she do? She got a lot of people to pay attention to her for, like, a hot minute. And, you know, now she's on this podcast being mentioned.
Now she's a fucking legend, is what she is. Respect. I've gone around. I've come around on it. I think she rules.
You talked yourself around.
I think she's cool as shit.
In real time, folks.
I would absolutely have her as a guest on this podcast if she was willing to go on. Yeah, I should. Lainey, tell us how to become a best-selling YA author, because she can actually give us a guaranteed way to do it, unlike most of the people doing workshops.
I think partly, though, what could be useful about that is, like, showing how fucked up and broken the whole system is. So that could be instructive.
Yeah.
To some degree, maybe.
I just think she rules. I want to hang out with her.
Get a tattoo.
Lainey, call me. Yeah, we'll get tattoos. No.
Rite Gud logo. No, don't.
Daggers.
No.
Little daggers.
Daggers.
Little New York Times daggers. That'd be sick. Okay. Another really glorious, recent, amazing literary hustler, Caroline Calloway. Now, Caroline Calloway was an Instagram influencer. She managed to get herself, I think, a $500,000 book deal for her memoirs while she was still in her 20s, based solely on her ability to post pretty pictures of, I think, Cambridge and write captions underneath them. Somehow, being a conventionally attractive white woman at Cambridge, who was good at selfies, she managed to get $500,000 for a book deal.
Low.
For her memoirs. Again, she was in her 20s. Who has enough material in their 20s to write memoirs? Very few people. But what happened? She ended up canceling this book and being sued to pay back at least $100,000 of the money of the advance, because this book, which she wrote, which was based on her own life, failed the Bechdel test. She complained that her own memoirs were too sexist and focused too much on romance and on men. It's incredible. So this was in 2017. In 2019, she became kind of famous for running a creativity workshop that has been compared to the Fire Festival. Now, I looked this up. It was only $165 for 4 hours, which isn't that bad.
No.
That's not that bad.
It's not crazy.
1 hour of which she did not attend. The topics included heartbreak and authenticity, and how to do a good flower crown. And the secret to making a good flower crown was whispered individually into each attendee's ear, and the secret was that there is no secret. This cost also included snacks, which she mostly ran out of, including hummus, but at one point she ran out of plates upon which to serve the hummus, so she was spooning hummus into her attendees' cupped hands during this workshop.
This is more interesting than any
This
book
sounds
she would have
amazing.
written.
I think I love her. I think she rules. So she's still running around.
You circled around on the hustle thing here.
Yeah, she's horrible, but also she rocks. So she's still running around cheerfully selling literal snake oil. She's actually selling actual snake oil.
Yeah.
Doing more scams, and I believe she's on OnlyFans too. So get on that. She is very pretty.
OnlyFans seems to be like all roads lead to OnlyFans.
Yeah.
For a number of people.
Good for her. She's terrible, but she's so terrible that she's kind of amazing. Again, we're at a point where if you're giving Caroline Calloway money, you kind of deserve to get ripped off. So I don't feel bad for any of the people she's scammed. Like, yeah, you deserve this.
Do you know, I think about, I don't know why I just thought of this. It had to have been OnlyFans, which always makes me think of Flannery O'Connor.
I'd take some hand hummus. I'll take it. I wouldn't pay $165 for it, but having an attractive white woman put hummus in my hand sounds pretty good.
What could she possibly be selling you? It reminds me of the TJ Mackey scene from Magnolia, where Tom Cruise is like trying to teach men how to tame women or something. It's that type of like, I'm going to draw you into a hotel ballroom, give you some Diet Coke and peanuts and say a bunch of platitudes over and over again. I don't.
Except the Diet Coke is like, she ran out of cups.
She ran out of cups.
You just got to put your hands out. You just open your mouth. Just open your mouth. Open it up.
Let me ask you this question: Why do you still persist in writing? Like, why? Knowing all of the barriers, knowing all of the hills and the heartache and the stoppage and all the negative shit, what is it that makes you still sit down and work on stuff?
That is a good question.
Cocaine.
Yeah, it is not a rational pursuit.
No.
It's not at all. I kind of almost think of it as an addiction.
I was being sort of facetious, obviously, with the cocaine part, but it is addictive because when you create something, you want more of it when you do it well, right? Or when you get a little taste of it. And I think that's what people want, is the idea of, I like sitting here, I like creating these things in my head, and when I give it to somebody and they like it, then that's even more and more and more, and you want to build it, so you're willing to part with money with other people who seem to know what they're doing, so you can get where they are, so you can feel even better, right? But like all addictions, right? More blow, more heroin, more whatever it happens to be is not going to get you to where you want to be, right? So the hustle from that side, people who get sucked into the hustle, or other people's hustle, rather, I should say, are people who've got a taste of what creative life can be, and they want to jumpstart it. They don't want to put in like the potential or the average decade or two that it usually takes to really crank out something crazy, or really good. And they want to do it now. They want to do it fast. They want it instantaneously. And on the other side, the people who are putting on the hustle for other people are, they like. Think about all these people looking at you, going, "You have the answer." That makes them feel good, and it just feeds itself.
So what I'm saying is that we are opening up a new tier on the Patreon for $165 a month.
For hummus.
At our special Flower Crown tier, I will personally meet you and put some hummus in your hands while wearing a flower crown.
And then everybody will scream like in Midsummer. They'll just scream at each other.
We'll all yell.
That's the best $165 I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Honestly, that's kind of what the Discord is like.
Yeah, that's free.
Yeah, well, that's $1.
$1. See,
it's
$1 can get you that.
Yeah, you can get that. You can basically experience that scene in Midsommar when a bunch of women scream in unison. It's good. It's pretty good. It's a good little group. So how do we deal with the bizarre state of things? How do we cope with it? I mean, it's tempting to say, I ignore it. I completely ignore it. But that's a little out of touch. It's a little snobby. It feels a little fake. And to be honest, it feels a little bit classist. I know that I know that there's a tendency of just absolutely shameless, soulless hacks to say, oh, those of you who believe in any kind of artistic integrity, you're just classist. And there's a lot of throwing out the word classist, and I think in a very bad faith way when it comes to the arts. But there is a reality, I think, that even if you do have a day job, writing is time-consuming, and it's just perfectly rational to want to be paid for this thing that you're pouring tons of work into. And being able to give up your day job and write full-time sounds pretty fucking sweet, and I can't blame anyone for hoping against hope to maybe get a chance to do that. Or even just saying, you know what, it's nice to get a couple extra $100 every now and then for putting out a story or putting out an article. Like, saying, oh, I don't think about the industry or I don't think about money at all sounds pretty unrealistic for those of us who live in the real world where you have to spend money to have food and a place to live. But then if you give into it completely, even if you do succeed, which is very unlikely, but even if you do succeed and you manage to make a living and make it, it kind of sounds like a goddamn nightmare. It doesn't look like it's good for your sanity. It doesn't look like it's good for your craft. You become this distorted creature that's like just your brand, getting more and more and more and more engagement and becoming less and less and less and less human. And then one day you wake up and you realize that you've decided to defend 9/11 today, and you ask yourself, why did I get here? How did I get here online? What am I doing? What have I become? I don't know.
How do we deal with it?
I don't know the solution.
No,
I'm just going to say that. I have no fucking idea. I'm sorry. I think it's up to every individual writer and what you're going through for and what your needs are. Like, if you're in a much more financially dire position, I'm not going to fault you for doing the hustle a little bit more and being a little bit more desperate. I don't have to do that, so I don't.
The thing is that people who tend to, years ago, before the decline of journalism, if you were going to be somebody who's going to grind out writing quickly and for money, you would be a journalist, because the point would be to gather the information, write an article or a column, publish it, do it all over again, right? I don't think people are really good at that. I think there are very few people who are actually really good at grinding out fiction over and over again. And
it's hard, especially to make it good.
Think about people who did do it and made money off of it, like Ray Bradbury, right? Ray Bradbury, who wrote, a lot of really good stories, but also probably a lot of stinkers too.
A lot of trash.
Right? So, admittedly so. By the way, I also want to say the amount of F&SF writers over the last 60, 70 years who also wrote pornography under different names.
Oh, yeah.
Is, right? So, that's a whole nother episode, perhaps. But, like...
Yeah, that does seem to be the one constant in terms of stuff you can churn out to make money is making porn, especially if it's like niche or fetish stuff. I don't know why there are so many furries who have a lot of money to spend commissioning very specific fetish artwork, but God bless them. They're the closest things we have to the Medicis in our modern era.
When you become a writer like that, any genre sort of becomes your habitat if it can pay, right? If it's going to put food on the table and pay your bills, you're going to do whatever you need to do. But again, that was when you could get paid and live off of it. Your capability of writing quick enough, whether or not it was good or not is a different story. Writing quick enough or quickly enough was everything. That's off to the wayside now, because everybody has to have a job to some degree, right? Or you're being supported by some rich family member, which again is probably few and far between. So we can't ignore it. But I would say if we talk about a hustle now, then if you have a full-time job, I don't think you can hustle. I think it's something else. If you have a job and you're writing on the side, what you have is you're a writer who has a different job. You got a
side hustle.
You have a side hustle, which is the other job, or the writing's the side hustle, or you take the hustle out of the equation and you're just trying to write. It's like, and then how much money are you making off of it, right? If it's like 1% of your total salary that you make off your real job, it's like, that's not a hustle. That's just That's just a slight. That's like a hobby that pays you, like you said, in beer and peanuts, right? So you have to sort of think about. By the way, people already know this, but let's just go ahead and lay this out. Like, let's say that you have a full-time job and you make $70,000 with this job, right? Maybe that's aiming high, somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000, maybe more. And you write on the side and you sell, say, 5 stories to a pro market every year. I don't know if that's good or not, but like, let's say that's how many you do.
That's pretty good.
And then how much money are you making off of all 5 of those? $1,000 total? Depending on how long the story is, who knows, right? If, say, after a couple years of that, someone comes to you, maybe not the Penguin Random House, but a smaller house, and says, hey, do you have an agent? Or, or an agent reaches out to you and you put together a collection of short stories, you write a novel, and then you publish it. I guarantee you're still not going to make a lot of money off that, right? You could do that over and over again. You're still not going to make money because you know why? We know professional writers who do that, who publish short stories and they publish novels and they still had to work, right? And these people were grinding it out for decades. So it's never going to go away. You have to, like, I think the conclusion here is if you want to write, you just need to want to write. So
all right, okay. I think we're looping around back to the beginning, so I think it's time to end it. But before we go, where can our listeners find your work?
So I'm online everywhere under the handle @bleakhousing, and my website's kylewinkler.net, and my books are on Amazon or wherever you buy books, most of them. So yeah, and get in touch with me, say hi, or don't, or yell at me, or don't.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. If you like what you heard, please head to patreon.com/writegud and subscribe. Until next time, keep writing good.
This has been Rite Gud with Raquel S. Benedict. Hosted by Raquel S. Benedict and produced by Matt Keeley for KS Media, LLC. Theme song by OK Glass. For comments and concerns, please write to us at ritegud@kittysneezes.com. That is RITEGUD@kittysneezes.com. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/writegud. This has been a Kitty Sneezes production.
kittysneezes.com in color.